The study of who Jesus truly is, according to the Bible itself, is a massive undertaking involving hundreds of scriptures. But since we have to start somewhere, I've chosen to start with John 1:1. The New English Translation Online Bible has thousands of footnotes, which are a tremendous source of great information. This Bible was produced by more than 20 Trinitarian scholars, and their Trinitarian biases are plain to see in many of their notes. But if you are able to see through the biases, the factual information they provide is invaluable. The NET scholars translate John 1:1 as, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was fully God." The word fully isn't actually in any Greek manuscript. It's a biased addition by these Trinitarian scholars to make sure their readers come away with the understanding that they themselves already have. But their extensive notes on the matter give enough information for critical thinkers to make up their own minds. Their technical note begins, "And the Word was fully God," or, "And what God was, the Word was." Colwell's rule is often invoked to support the translation of theos as definite, God, rather than indefinite, a God here. However, Colwell's rule merely permits, but does not demand, that a predicate nominative ahead of an equative verb be translated as definite rather than indefinite. Furthermore, Colwell's rule did not deal with a third possibility, that the anarthrous predicate noun may have more of a qualitative nuance when placed ahead of the verb. So what does all of this mean? Well, the New Testament was written in the Greek language, which uses definite articles such as the, this, and that, but does not use indefinite articles such as a and an that we use in English. So anytime you see the indefinite article a or an in an English translation, it was added by the translators so that the sentence makes sense to us in English. But we don't have to add definite articles to the Greek text, because if the writer intended the noun to be definite, as in, "Let's meet at this house" versus "Let's meet at a house," he would have used the definite article. On the other hand, if he wanted to say, "Let's meet at a house," he would have written, "Let's meet at house," and English translators would add the indefinite article a to the text so that it makes sense to us. So if John wanted to write that the Word was the God, or God with a capital G as we would write it, then he could have. He could have written that the Word was with the God, and the Word was the God. But he didn't. In fact, from Wikipedia, Origen of Alexandria, a teacher in Greek grammar of the 3rd century, wrote about the use of the definite article. We next notice John's use of the article in these sentences. He does not write without care in this respect, nor is he unfamiliar with the niceties of the Greek tongue. In some cases he uses the article, and in some he omits it. He adds the article to the logos, but to the name of God he adds it sometimes only. He uses the article when the name of God refers to the uncreated cause of all things, and omits it when the logos is named God. Origen concludes, the true God, then, is the God. In other words, the God whom John explicitly called the God, the one who was with the Word in the beginning. John didn't identify the Word as the God because he was there when Jesus himself clearly distinguished the only true God as someone other than himself, as the one who sent him. So the fact that John, who knew what he was doing, intentionally chose to use the definite article for the God the Word was with in the beginning, but not when he called the Word God, would normally result in translating part C as, "And the Word was a God." We can see this in Acts 12, where Herod was speaking and the crowd said that he was speaking with the voice of a God. Since there is no definite article before God, we translate as a God and not God with a capital G. In the next verse, however, there is a definite article before God, and so it's rightly translated as the God, or God with a capital G. We see it again in Acts 28, where Paul was bitten by the poisonous snake and didn't die, so the islanders concluded he was a god. Why is it translated as a god and not God with a capital G? Because the Greek writer didn't use the definite article with the word God, and there's no contextual information to indicate that the islanders thought Paul was the Most High God. And that brings us back to the technical note we were discussing earlier. So what is Colwell's rule? Well, biblical scholar Ernest Colwell discovered that definite predicate nouns which precede the verb usually lack the article. A predicate nominative which precedes the verb cannot be translated as an indefinite or qualitative noun solely because of the absence of the article. If the context suggests that the predicate is definite, it should be translated as a definite noun. So normally, if the writer did not include a definite article, we would automatically add the indefinite article a or an into the text so that it makes sense to us in English. All Colwell is saying is that in some cases where the writer excluded the definite article, we can add it to the text for them if the context makes it perfectly clear that they were talking about, for example, this particular house, as opposed to a house. So the NET scholars are pointing out that many Trinitarians use Colwell's rule to claim that we must add the definite article to the last part, that John could have added himself but didn't, and that John 1:1c therefore must read, and the Word was the God, or God with a capital G. However, Colwell's rule merely permits but does not demand that we add a definite article that, once again, John could have included himself if he wanted to. The fact that John, who knew very well how the Greek language worked, yet specifically chose not to include the article, would normally and grammatically result in a translation of, and the Word was a God, as I've shown in those 2 verses from the book of Acts earlier. And there is absolutely zero context in those 17 Greek words of John 1:1 to cause anyone to force a definite article into John's words. In fact, the context actually argues against such manipulation. As the NET scholars aptly point out later in their note, the construction in John 1:1c does not equate the Word with the person of God. This is ruled out by 1:1b. The Word was with God. The Gospels were translated into the Egyptian Coptic language very early on, possibly while the Apostle John was still alive. Coptic uses an indefinite article like English does. Would it surprise you to know that John 1:1c in the Coptic Bible says, and the Word was a God? So while the original language of the New Testament was still being widely spoken, the very first chance someone had to translate John 1:1 into a language that uses indefinite articles, they translated it as, and the Word was a God. Would it surprise you to know that dozens of translations through the years also have, and the Word was a God, or and the Word was divine, or and the Word was deity, etc.? And if we read between the lines here, the NET scholars are also arguing for a translation of and the Word was a God, because there is no special rule of Greek grammar that needs to be invoked for a translation of a God. A God is the natural Greek to English translation of the words John actually wrote. You only need to invoke a special rule if you want to force a definite article into the words that John wrote, when he could have done that himself if he wanted to. So these Trinitarian scholars don't want the most natural translation of a God, and they know how transparent their bias would be if they added to the scriptures by forcing John's text into saying the God when John didn't write the God. So they chose a third option. They decided to give the anarthrous noun, which just means the word God without the definite article in part C, a qualitative meaning. And what does that mean? Well, both Lassie and Rin Tin Tin were qualitatively dog, meaning they were members of dog kind. Both I and my sister are qualitatively man, which means we are members of mankind. So their conclusion is that the Word is a member of God-kind, hence their translation, and what God was, the Word was. But logical thinking tells us that if Lassie is qualitatively dog, then Lassie is a dog. And if I am qualitatively man, then I am a man. Likewise, if the Word is qualitatively God, the Word is a God. Consider this analogy. Most of us know that the Hebrew word Adam refers to the person Adam, the first man God created, and also to every other individual human being, both male and female, and also to mankind as a whole. So imagine that John 1:1 said this: "In the beginning was Eve, and Eve was with the Adam, and Eve was Adam." Who among us would add a definite article into that last part, forcing the writer to be saying that Eve was the very person of Adam she was with? Who would do that, knowing that the writer could have included that article himself if that's what he intended to convey? Okay, who would add an indefinite article that the writer's language didn't allow him to use, knowing that his meaning was that Eve was also a human being who was with the first human being, Adam, in the beginning? The only difference here is that nobody has a personal desire to force Eve into being the very entity of Adam she was with. The bottom line is that the natural, honest, and proper translation of John 1:1 is, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God." But wait, that means there are more than one God. I thought the Hebrew culture and the Bible were strictly monotheistic, acknowledging the existence of only one God. Nothing could be further from the truth, as I'll show scripturally in the next video.